He was just a bus driver, a man of quiet dignity with silver hair and a worn navy blue uniform that had seen better decades. His job was simple: to ferry a group of boisterous young soldiers to their annual regimental banquet, a night of celebration at a grand, historic hotel. They boarded his bus with the swagger of conquerors, their crisp, modern uniforms, a stark contrast to his own faded attire. They laughed and joked, their voices echoing in the cavernous vehicle, but their eyes slid over him as if he were part of the upholstery. To them, he was invisible, a relic from a bygone era, and they had no idea that the quiet man at the wheel was a living legend, a ghost from a war they had only read about in textbooks. They never saw it coming. The moment he rolled up his sleeve, the laughter would die in their throats, and what happened next left everyone utterly speechless. The old man, Silas, gripped the oversized steering wheel, his knuckles pale but his hands steady. He had driven this route 1,000 times, ferrying countless souls across the city, each one a fleeting story in his rearview mirror. Tonight, the story was one of youth and arrogance. The soldiers in the back belonged to an elite airborne unit, and they wore their prestige like a second skin. Their conversation was a cocktail of inside jokes, embellished tales of training exercises, and casual disdain for anyone outside their exclusive circle. Silas listened, his expression impassive, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked road ahead. He heard the muttered comments, the thinly veiled jabs at his age, his ancient bus, his simple station in life. One of them, a lieutenant with a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his face, loudly remarked, "Can you imagine spending your whole life driving in circles? What a waste." His companions chuckled in agreement. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had driven in more than just circles. He had driven through jungles laced with traps, through deserts under a hostile sun, through bombed-out cities where every shadow held a threat. He had ferried the wounded, the dying, and the dead. The circles he drove now were a luxury, a quiet epilogue to a life defined by straight, dangerous lines. He remained silent, a calm island in a sea of youthful hubris. The kind witness, a young private sitting near the front, shifted uncomfortably. He offered Silas a hesitant smile, a small, silent apology for his comrade's behavior. Silas met his eyes in the mirror and gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture that conveyed understanding and a profound, unshakable patience. The bus rumbled on, carrying its cargo of oblivious warriors and one hidden powerhouse, a sleeping giant content to be underestimated, just waiting for the moment of arrival, the moment of truth that he knew, with the certainty of a seasoned soldier, was fast approaching. The Grand Hotel loomed in the distance, its lights a beacon of the confrontation to come. The hotel, a bastion of old-world opulence, rose before them like a palace from a forgotten age. Its sandstone facade was illuminated by warm, golden lights, and a long, crimson carpet flowed from the grand entrance, ready to welcome the city's elite. As Silas brought the bus to a smooth halt, the juxtaposition was almost comical, the weathered, humble vehicle against the backdrop of such unapologetic luxury. The soldiers, momentarily silenced by the grandeur, quickly regained their composure and began to file out, their arrogance restored. The sneering lieutenant, whose name was Deckard, paused at the door. He turned back to look at Silas, who was methodically preparing to shut down the vehicle for the night. "Don't get any ideas, old-timer," Deckard said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This event is for a certain class of people, people who've actually done something with their lives. You just wait here until we're done." The insult hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Silas met his gaze, his eyes as calm and deep as a forest pool. "I am simply doing my job, son," he replied, his voice even and low. But as the last soldier disembarked, Silas did something unexpected. He switched off the engine, took the keys, and with a slow, deliberate movement, stood up from his seat. He straightened his simple uniform jacket and walked towards the bus door. The soldiers, now gathered on the sidewalk, watched him with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "What do you think you're doing?" Deckard called out, his hands on his hips. "Did you not hear me? People like you don't belong here." Silas stepped off the bus and onto the curb, his worn leather shoes making a soft sound on the wet pavement. He looked at the grand entrance, then at the group of young men, and a flicker of something ancient and powerful stirred in his eyes. He had been in places far more exclusive and far more dangerous than this hotel, and he had faced down men far more intimidating than this uniformed boy. He was not just a bus driver, he was a guest. He had an invitation tucked into his inner pocket, a formal request from the highest levels of command, a fact he had no intention of revealing just yet. Let them believe he was an interloper. Let their arrogance build. The fall would be that much greater. The air in the hotel lobby was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. A magnificent crystal chandelier hung from the frescoed ceiling, casting a dazzling, star-like pattern on the marble floor below. Men in decorated uniforms and women in elegant gowns moved with a practiced grace, their voices a low, cultured murmur. Into this scene of refined splendor walked Silas, a simple, gray figure in a sea of color and prestige. The group of soldiers, led by Lieutenant Deckard, had preceded him, their smug laughter echoing momentarily before being absorbed by the opulent surroundings. They had taken up a position near the grand staircase, watching him, waiting for the moment he would be unceremoniously ejected. Deckard's sneer was one of pure, malicious anticipation. Silas ignored them. He walked steadily towards the check-in table, his posture straight, his head held high. A young woman in a hotel uniform, a junior event coordinator, looked up. Her name was Chloe, and she had witnessed the entire exchange outside. She had seen the cruelty in the soldier's eyes and the quiet dignity in the old man's bearing. While others might have seen a man who was lost or out of place, she saw a person who deserved respect. As Silas approached, she offered him a warm, genuine smile. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice clear and kind. "Welcome. May I have your name?" Before Silas could answer, Deckard strode over, his polished boots clicking sharply on the marble. "There must be some mistake," he said, addressing Chloe but keeping his eyes fixed on Silas. "This man is the bus driver. He seems to be confused. He needs to wait outside with the other service staff." Chloe's smile faltered slightly as she looked from the arrogant officer to the calm old man. She was the kind witness, the small point of decency in a brewing storm of incivility. She instinctively knew who was in the right. "All guests are welcome to check in, Lieutenant," she said politely but firmly, her gaze returning to Silas. "Sir?" she prompted again. Silas gave her a small, appreciative nod. "The name is Silas Crane," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that seemed to momentarily surprise even Deckard. Chloe's fingers danced across her tablet, her eyes widened slightly. "Of course, Mr. Crane," she said, her tone shifting from polite to deeply respectful. "We've been expecting you. The general has reserved a seat for you at his table." The color drained from Deckard's face. He stared at Silas, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the humble bus driver with a guest of honor at the general's personal table. It was a cognitive dissonance he couldn't resolve, and his arrogance began to curdle into confusion and a faint, unfamiliar flicker of fear. The confrontation that followed was a slow, deliberate escalation, a public spectacle orchestrated by Lieutenant Deckard's bruised ego. The revelation that Silas was an expected guest, and an esteemed one at that, had not humbled him. It had enraged him. He could not comprehend it, and so he chose to believe it was a mistake, a clerical error that he, a superior officer, was destined to correct. "This is absurd," Deckard announced, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. He turned to Chloe, the junior coordinator. "Check again. Crane, C-R-A-N-E. You'll find he's on the driver manifest, not the guest list." Chloe held her ground, her respect for Silas solidifying into a protective stance. "I have checked, Lieutenant," she replied, her voice unwavering. "Mr. Crane is a guest of General Miller. If you have an issue with the general's arrangements, I suggest you take it up with his aide." Deckard scoffed, a dismissive, ugly sound. He turned his full, sneering attention back to Silas, who had remained silent and observant throughout the exchange. "So, you've got friends in high places, old man? Pulled some strings to get a free meal?" He began to circle Silas slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Let me tell you something. This uniform," he said, jabbing a thumb at the medals on his own chest, "is earned. It stands for excellence, for strength, for a commitment to a higher standard. It's not a costume for party crashers." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still audible to the growing crowd of onlookers. "People can tell, you know. They can see you don't belong. Look at you. Your clothes are worn out, your hands are rough. "You smell of diesel. You are an insult to everyone in this room who has sacrificed to be here." The public humiliation was now in full swing. Other soldiers from Deckard's unit had drifted closer, forming a semicircle, their faces a mixture of amusement and sycophantic agreement with their leader. Silas stood in the center of their judgment, his calmness a stark contrast to Deckard's agitated performance. He met the lieutenant's furious gaze without flinching. "I am prepared to make a purchase," Silas said, borrowing a line from a different kind of story but for the same purpose, to show he was not intimidated. His calm, firm response was like fuel on a fire. It was not the reaction Deckard wanted. He had expected fear, stammering, a hasty retreat. He had not expected quiet defiance. "A purchase?" Deckard laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You couldn't afford the valet parking, let alone anything in here. Now get out, before I have you thrown out for impersonating someone of value." The lobby of the St. Regis Hotel had transformed from a space of elegance, mingling into a theater of cruelty. Lieutenant Deckard, now fully committed to his role as the arrogant gatekeeper, had made Silas the unwilling star of his performance. He gestured expansively at Silas's simple, navy blue uniform jacket. "Is this the best you could do?" he asked the assembled onlookers, his voice dripping with mock pity. "Did you think this would pass for a dress uniform? This is a gathering of eagles, of warriors. It is not a bus station." Several of his subordinates snickered, their adulation for their superior overriding any sense of decency. The circle of spectators had widened. Some guests, clearly uncomfortable, tried to move away, but others were drawn in by the sheer audacity of the confrontation. They watched, their faces impassive, a silent jury to Silas's public trial. Deckard wasn't finished. He pointed a finger at Silas's chest. "Where are your medals, old man? Every soldier here has decorations. They represent our service, our valor. What do you have to show for your life? A retirement watch and a bus schedule?" Silas remained immobile, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He had medals. They were tucked away in a simple wooden box in his small apartment, collecting dust. Medals for valor, for service in campaigns whose names would be foreign to these young soldiers, for wounds received in the defense of principles that this lieutenant seemed to have forgotten. But he did not speak of them. To do so would be to engage on Deckard's level, to concede that worth was something that could be pinned to a chest. His silence seemed to infuriate Deckard even more. The lieutenant saw it as weakness, as an admission of his own insignificance. He saw the quiet dignity and mistook it for shame. "See, he has nothing to say," Deckard announced triumphantly to the room. "This man is a nobody who has wandered in off the street, hoping for a handout." He took a step closer, his face inches from Silas's, the ultimate act of intimidation. "I am giving you one final chance to walk out of here with your tail between your legs. If you do not, I will personally ensure you are not only removed, but also reported for trespassing. Your little joyride is over." The threat was clear, the humiliation complete. Silas had been publicly judged, ridiculed, and threatened. He had been defined by his simple clothes and his humble job. In the eyes of Lieutenant Deckard and his followers, he was worthless. And still, Silas did not flinch. He simply took a slow, deep breath, a symbolic action of a man steadying himself not against fear, but against a profound sense of disappointment. From across the grand lobby, near the entrance to the main ballroom, a figure had been observing the escalating scene. General Marcus Thorne was a man whose presence commanded immediate respect. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and a pair of piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. His uniform was immaculate, adorned with the quiet, authoritative decorations of a lifetime of command. He was the guest of honor, the living embodiment of the values Deckard claimed to represent. He had been in a conversation with a senator when the raised, aggressive tones of the young lieutenant had cut through the polite murmur of the reception. At first, he paid it little mind. High-spirited young officers were a common feature of such events. But as the confrontation dragged on, and the lieutenant's voice grew more venomous, the general's attention sharpened. He excused himself from the senator, his gaze now fixed on the small, ugly drama unfolding near the check-in desk. He saw the circle of onlookers, the sneering faces of the young soldiers, and at the center of it all, a quiet old man in a simple uniform, standing with an impossible stillness. The general's eyes narrowed. He did not recognize the old man. but he recognized the posture. It was a stance of absolute self-control, of a man who had faced far worse than the verbal barbs of an arrogant boy and had emerged unbroken. It was a soldier's bearing, but of a different era, a different school of hardship. He watched as Lieutenant Deckard leaned into the old man's personal space, his finger jabbing aggressively. He saw the old man's slow, deliberate breath, the subtle squaring of his shoulders. It was the action of a man preparing for a conflict he did not seek, but was fully prepared to end. The general felt a stirring of protective anger. This was not what his army stood for. This public bullying, this display of disrespect for an elder, was a stain on the uniform they all wore. He began to move. He did not hurry. His steps were measured and purposeful, each one a silent, inexorable advance towards the confrontation. He was the vindicator, the figure of ultimate authority, moving to restore order and balance. The crowd, sensing a shift in the room's power dynamic, began to part before him, creating a clear path. The low murmur of conversation quieted as more and more people noticed the general's advance, their eyes following his determined trajectory. Deckard, his back to the general, was too engrossed in his own performance to notice. He was about to deliver his final, crushing remark, the one that would cement his dominance. He had no idea that his own judgment day was walking towards him, one deliberate, resounding step at a time. The air grew thick with anticipation. The trap was set, not for the humble bus driver, but for the arrogant gatekeeper who had so badly misjudged his man. The general's approach was a silent, powerful current moving through the stagnant waters of the lobby. The guests turned, their expressions shifting from detached curiosity to rapt attention. They recognized the 4-star insignia on his shoulders, the quiet authority in his stride. They knew that whatever was happening was about to reach its conclusion. Lieutenant Deckard, however, remained blissfully unaware, lost in the theater of his own making. He saw the crowd's attention shifting, but he misinterpreted it, believing they were captivated by his righteous takedown of the impostor. This only fueled his arrogance further. "It's time for you to go," Deckard said, reaching out as if to grab Silas by the arm. "The real heroes are here now, and we don't need old relics cluttering up the place." It was the perfect, final insult, delivered just as the general was closing the distance. The junior soldiers with Deckard, seeing the general approaching over their leader's shoulder, suddenly snapped to attention, their smug expressions vanishing, replaced by masks of rigid, professional deference. Their sudden change in demeanor was the first clue to Deckard that something was amiss. He faltered, his hand hovering in the air. He half-turned, a confused look on his face, and then he saw him. General Marcus Thorne was standing not 10 feet away, his face an unreadable mask of cold fury. The pace of the entire scene, which had been a slow, simmering burn, suddenly quickened dramatically. Deckard's bravado evaporated in an instant. He whipped around, his back ramrod straight, and threw the sharpest salute of his life. "General Thorne! An honor, sir!" he barked, his voice suddenly 2 octaves higher than it had been a moment before. The general did not return the salute. His eyes, like chips of ice, were not on Deckard. They were locked on Silas. And it was in that moment, under the immense pressure of the general's arrival, that Silas made a simple, almost absent-minded gesture. The cuffs of his uniform jacket were a little tight. He raised his left arm to adjust the button, and in doing so, his sleeve slid back several inches, exposing the weathered, faded skin of his forearm. And there, just below his wrist, was the tattoo. It was not a grand or colorful design. It was small, discreet, and rendered in a faded blue-black ink that spoke of immense age. It was the simple, unmistakable silhouette of a silent, stalking panther, its body lean and muscular, its eyes seeming to gleam even in the soft light of the lobby. It was a symbol few would ever recognize, a ghost from a clandestine chapter of military history. But General Thorne knew exactly what it was, and he stopped cold. The world seemed to slow down. The murmur of the crowd, the distant clinking of glasses, the soft strains of a string quartet from the ballroom all faded into an indistinct hum. The only thing that was real was the sight of that small, faded tattoo on the old man's forearm. General Marcus Thorne, a man who had faced down enemy tanks and stared into the cold eyes of warlords without so much as a tremor, froze completely. His forward momentum ceased, his body went rigid. His face, which had been a mask of cold anger, was now a canvas of profound, undisguised shock. His mouth fell slightly agape, and for a heartbeat, the four-star general looked like a young cadet who had just seen a ghost. And in a way, he had. The soldiers around Deckard were utterly bewildered. They saw the general's reaction but couldn't comprehend its cause. They followed his gaze, looking at the old bus driver's arm, at the simple panther tattoo. To them, it meant nothing. It was just an old, crude piece of ink, the kind you might see on any sailor or dock worker from a bygone generation. They looked back at the general, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning apprehension. Something was happening that was far outside their understanding. Deckard, still frozen in his salute, risked a sideways glance. He saw the tattoo and dismissed it instantly. He saw the general's face and felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones. The general's reaction was not one of anger or disgust or any of the things he might have expected. It was a look of awe, a look of reverence, a look so profound it bordered on veneration. Silas, seemingly unaware of the effect his simple gesture had caused, finished adjusting his cuff and let his arm fall back to his side. He looked at the general, and for the first time that evening, a flicker of recognition, a hint of a shared, unspoken past, passed between the two men. It was a silent communication that transcended rank and time. The general took one more step forward, his movements now slow, almost reverent. He was no longer a commander approaching a problem. He was a pilgrim approaching a shrine. The entire lobby was now utterly silent. The air crackled with a tension that was 1,000 times more powerful than the petty conflict that had preceded it. Everyone watched, holding their breath, waiting for the general to speak, knowing that whatever he said would change the entire reality of the evening. They were about to learn that the man they had dismissed as a nobody was, in fact, somebody of immense and terrifying importance. The general ignored Deckard's ramrod-straight salute, his eyes never leaving Silas's face. He walked the final few feet until he was standing directly in front of the old bus driver. The juxtaposition was staggering. The four-star general in his perfectly tailored, decorated uniform, and the humble man in his faded, worn-out jacket. But all the power in the lobby, all the authority, now seemed to emanate from the old man. General Thorne took a deep, steadying breath. Then, in a move that sent a wave of collective shock through the entire room, he clicked his heels together and snapped to attention, raising his hand in a salute so sharp, so precise, it was a work of art. It was a salute of profound respect, the kind a soldier gives not to a superior rank, but to a revered legend. The silence in the room became absolute, so deep it was like a physical pressure. You could hear the frantic, panicked beating of Lieutenant Deckard's heart. He stood, his own salute now feeling ridiculous and insulting, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. Why was a four-star general saluting a bus driver? The general held his salute for a long, respectful moment before speaking. His voice, when it came, was low and filled with an emotion that no one present had ever heard from him before. It was a mix of awe and disbelief. "Forgive me," the general said, his voice resonating in the stillness. "I did not recognize you at first, sir." He used the word sir not as a formality, but as an acknowledgement of profound seniority, a deference that defied the visible ranks on their shoulders. He then lowered his hand but remained at attention. He turned his head slightly, his icy gaze sweeping over the pale, terrified faces of Lieutenant Deckard and his men. "Do you have any idea who you have been speaking to?" he asked, his voice now laced with a cold, controlled fury. No one answered. They could barely breathe. The general turned his attention back to Silas. "Shadow Panther," the general said, his voice barely a whisper, speaking the name like an incantation. "I thought you were all gone. I thought you were all just stories they told us at the academy to keep us from getting too cocky." Silas finally allowed a small, weary smile to touch his lips. "The stories are always bigger than the men, Marcus," he said, using the general's first name with a quiet familiarity that caused another ripple of shock to pass through the crowd. "Most of us are gone. A few of us are just old." The general shook his head slowly, a look of utter reverence on his face. The comeuppance had begun, and it was more total and devastating than anyone could have imagined. General Thorne kept his body angled toward Silas, a posture of respect, but his words were now directed at the petrified soldiers and the captivated audience in the lobby. His voice rose, taking on the tone of a lecturer on a battlefield, a historian revealing a secret and terrible truth. "You see this tattoo?" he asked, his voice ringing with authority as he pointed toward Silas's arm, though Silas kept the sleeve down. "You probably think it's just some cheap ink. But that symbol, that simple black panther, is the mark of Unit 734. The Shadow Panthers." A few of the older officers on the periphery of the crowd murmured in recognition, their eyes widening. It was a unit that was officially denied, a Black Ops group from the deadliest, most secretive conflicts of a past generation. Their existence was the stuff of military myth. "This unit," the general continued, his voice dropping, becoming more intense, "was sent on missions that no one else would take, missions that officially never happened. They operated behind enemy lines for months, sometimes years at a time, with no support, no backup, and no chance of rescue if they were caught. They were ghosts. They were legends. Every single member was a hero decorated in secret with the highest honors, honors they were forbidden to ever display." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then turned his head and pinned Lieutenant Deckard with a glare that could have melted steel. "You asked him where his medals were, Lieutenant. This man was awarded the Medal of Honor. In secret. He was awarded 3 silver stars. In secret. He was awarded 5 bronze stars for valor. In secret. He has more confirmed kills with a knife than your entire platoon has with their rifles. He has survived things you cannot even imagine in your worst nightmares. And he did it all not for the glory or the parades, because he knew he would get neither. He did it for his country. For soldiers like you, so you could have the luxury of standing here in a fancy hotel and preening about your own supposed importance." The color had completely drained from Deckard's face. He looked like he might be sick. His body began to tremble, the crisp professionalism of his stance dissolving into a puddle of pure, unadulterated fear. The man he had called an old relic, a nobody, a party crasher, this man was a giant of military history. He had not just insulted a bus driver, he had desecrated a living monument. The faces of his fellow soldiers mirrored his terror. They had been laughing accomplices, and now they were standing in the shadow of a legend they had mocked, facing the cold fury of a 4-star general. The humiliation they had inflicted on Silas was now returning to them 1,000-fold, a crushing weight of shame and terror. The breaking of Lieutenant Deckard was a swift and total affair. His carefully constructed veneer of arrogance and superiority shattered into a million pieces, revealing the frightened, insecure young man beneath. His face, once a mask of smug condescension, was now pale and slick with a sheen of cold sweat. His eyes, which had been so full of scorn, were now wide with terror, darting between the impassive face of Silas and the cold fury of General Thorne. "Sir, he stammered, his voice a choked, unrecognizable croak. I had no idea. I am so sorry, sir. Please." He stumbled forward, his hands outstretched in a desperate, pleading gesture, a pathetic attempt at an apology that was entirely for his own benefit. A frantic bid to save his career from the abyss he now saw yawning before him. The other soldiers in his unit were equally undone. Their casual cruelty had curdled into abject fear. They avoided looking at Silas, at the general, at anyone. They stared at their own polished boots, as if hoping the marble floor would swallow them whole. Their silent complicity now weighed on them like a physical burden. General Thorne looked at the groveling lieutenant with utter contempt. "You are sorry because you got caught, Lieutenant," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You are sorry because you have just humiliated yourself in front of a man whose boots you are not worthy to polish. Your apology is worthless because it is born of fear, not of genuine remorse." Deckard flinched as if he had been physically struck. He tried to speak again, but no words would come out. His professional and personal world had collapsed in the space of 5 minutes. Silas, the humble powerhouse, watched the pathetic display with a deep-seated weariness. He had seen this before. He had seen arrogant men break under pressure on the battlefield, their bravado revealed as a thin shell hiding a hollow core. He took no pleasure in Deckard's disintegration. He saw not an enemy to be vanquished, but a profound and teachable failure of character. It was this instinct, the instinct of a leader rather than a punisher, that led him to speak. He raised a hand, a simple, calming gesture. "That's enough, Marcus," he said softly to the general. Then, he turned his gaze to the terrified lieutenant. The room was so quiet that the soft rustle of his worn uniform sleeve was clearly audible. All eyes were on him, the man who had been the object of such scorn, now the undisputed center of power and moral authority in the room. He was about to deliver his verdict, not with anger or a thirst for revenge, but with the quiet, devastating weight of earned wisdom. Silas looked directly at Lieutenant Deckard, but his words were meant for everyone in the room, for every soldier who wore the uniform. His voice was not loud, but it carried an undeniable gravity that commanded absolute attention. "The uniform doesn't make the man, son," he began, his tone calm and measured, more like a grandfather than a war hero. "It's the man who gives meaning to the uniform. Yours is a symbol of a promise to protect, to serve, and to honor the values our country stands for. One of those values is respect, not just respect for your superiors, but respect for everyone. The farmer who grows your food, the mechanic who fixes your transport, the citizen you have sworn to protect." He paused, letting his gaze drift over the other young soldiers. "You walk in here, proud of your strength, proud of your elite training, and you should be. But true strength isn't about looking down on others. It's about lifting them up. It's about having the humility to know that you can learn something from everyone." The quietest person in the room is often the one who has seen the most. His eyes returned to Deckard, who was still trembling, his face a mask of shame. "You judged me by my clothes and my job. You saw an old man driving a bus and you decided you knew my worth. You were wrong. And you will be wrong again and again in your life if you do not learn this one simple lesson. The measure of a person is not what they have, but what they give. It's not the medals on their chest, but the scars on their soul and the quiet dignity with which they carry them." There was no anger in his voice, only a profound and moralistic certainty. He was not scolding a subordinate. He was teaching a vital, painful lesson. "I don't want your apology," Silas continued, his voice softening slightly. "An apology born of fear is meaningless. What I want is for you to learn. I want you to go home tonight and think about the kind of soldier, the kind of man you want to be. Do you want to be one who builds his own self-worth by tearing others down? Or do you want to be one who understands that true honor comes from respecting the honor in everyone else, no matter who they are?" He had not raised his voice. He had not sought revenge. He had simply offered a path to redemption, framing the entire humiliating episode as a critical learning opportunity. It was a display of power far greater than any physical threat, a moral victory that left everyone in the room stunned into a reflective silence. General Thorne let Silas's words hang in the air, allowing their full weight to settle upon the disgraced soldiers. He then stepped forward, his face grim, ready to translate the moral lesson into a concrete, military consequence. "Lieutenant Deckard," he said, his voice now cold and official, "your behavior tonight was a disgrace to your uniform, to your unit, and to the Army itself. You have demonstrated a profound lack of judgment and a character unbecoming of an officer." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the other members of the unit. "And all of you who stood by and laughed, you are equally culpable." Your silence was an endorsement. The general took a deep breath. "There will be a formal inquiry into this incident. But your immediate consequences begin now. Your entire platoon's weekend leave is canceled, indefinitely. Instead, you will be spending your Saturdays and Sundays on a new assignment." He turned and looked at Silas, a silent question in his eyes. Silas gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Your new assignment," the general announced, "is the Veterans Outreach Program. You will spend your weekends at the VA hospital and the local veterans' home. You will not be there as soldiers, you will be there as volunteers. You will clean floors, serve meals, and you will sit and listen. You will listen to the stories of the men who came before you. Men who fought in Korea, in Vietnam, in places you've never even heard of. Men who have nothing but a small pension and their memories." He then focused his full attention back on Deckard. "And you, Lieutenant, will have a special project. You will be personally assigned to Mr. Crane here. You will report to him every Saturday morning. You will drive him wherever he needs to go. You will help him with his groceries. You will mow his lawn. And you will listen to every single thing he has to say. You will learn the history you have so arrogantly dismissed. Perhaps if you are lucky, a small fraction of his dignity and honor will rub off on you. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Deckard whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and, for the first time, a glimmer of genuine shame. The punishment was not a demotion or a discharge. It was something far more potent. It was a forced education in humility, a long, arduous path towards understanding the very values he had so publicly violated. The vindication was complete, not with a shout, but with a quiet, powerful, and utterly just sentence. 6 months later, the atmosphere at the Regional Military Academy was palpably different. In a small, sunlit classroom, a group of young, eager cadets sat in rapt attention. At the front of the room was Silas Crane, dressed not in his bus driver's uniform, but in a simple, comfortable cardigan. He spoke in his usual quiet, measured tones, not lecturing, but sharing stories. And beside him, operating the projector, was a changed man. Lieutenant Deckard's posture was no longer arrogant. The sneer was gone, replaced by an expression of quiet focus and deep, genuine respect. His uniform was as crisp as ever, but he wore it differently now, with a humility that he had not possessed before. Every Saturday for the past 6 months, he had reported to Silas's small, immaculate apartment. He had driven the old bus driver to the VA hospital, where Silas volunteered. He had sat for hours, listening as Silas spoke with other elderly veterans, hearing tales of unimaginable hardship and quiet courage. He had learned the story behind the Shadow Panther tattoo, a story of survival, loss, and unwavering duty that made his own military accomplishments feel like child's play. He saw the respect Silas commanded from men whose sacrifices had been all but forgotten by the world. He had witnessed true strength, and it had humbled him to his core. In the classroom, Silas was finishing a story about a long, silent night spent in a jungle, miles from any friendly forces. The cadets were on the edge of their seats. "Courage," Silas concluded, "is not about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing your duty anyway. It's about knowing that the person next to you is just as scared, and being strong for them." Deckard looked at Silas, his expression one of pure admiration. He had learned that lesson not in a training simulation, but in the quiet, lived experience of the man he had once so cruelly misjudged. His redemption was not a sudden epiphany, but a slow, gradual transformation built on weeks of listening, learning, and serving. He had come to see Silas not just as a war hero, but as a mentor and a friend. The once arrogant gatekeeper had become a devoted student, and in doing so, he had finally started to become the kind of officer he had once only pretended to be. The time jump had revealed not a punishment, but a profound and life-altering education. The incident at the St. Regis banquet had sent ripples through the highest levels of the regional command. General Thorne, deeply disturbed by the arrogance he had witnessed in his junior officers, had been spurred to action. He realized that the institutional memory was fading, that the connection between the modern, technologically advanced army and the gritty, hard-won lessons of its past was becoming frayed. The systemic positive change began with the creation of the Legacy Program, an initiative spearheaded by the general himself. The program was designed to bridge the generational gap between active-duty soldiers and the veteran community. It made volunteer work at VA centers a mandatory part of officer training. It established a new curriculum in military history, one that focused not just on famous battles and glorious victories, but on the personal stories and ethical dilemmas faced by ordinary soldiers in extraordinary circumstances. The centerpiece of the new program was a weekly guest lecture series. Veterans from all conflicts were invited to the academy to speak directly to the cadets and junior officers. They shared their experiences, answered questions, and provided a living link to the history the young soldiers were inheriting. And the program's most sought-after speaker was a retired bus driver named Silas Crane. His sessions were always standing room only. But the most surprising advocate for the Legacy Program was Lieutenant Deckard. He had embraced his punishment with a convert's zeal. After his official assignment with Silas had ended, he had volunteered to continue. He became the program's primary administrative officer, working tirelessly to find and invite veteran speakers, to coordinate volunteer schedules, and to share his own story as a cautionary tale. He spoke to new recruits about his own failings, about the night he had mistaken humility for weakness and silence for insignificance. His public admission of his own profound error became one of the most powerful teaching tools in the academy. The systemic change was real and tangible. Young soldiers began to see the elderly veterans in their communities not as relics, but as libraries of invaluable knowledge and experience. The culture of arrogant elitism was slowly being replaced by a culture of curiosity, respect, and a deeper understanding of the true meaning of service. It was a quiet, profound revolution. All started because one arrogant man had tried, and failed, to humiliate a humble hero. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Silas guided his bus through the familiar city streets. His shift was almost over. A new group of young soldiers were on board, heading from the training base back to their barracks. But this group was different. As they had boarded, each one had nodded to him, their greetings of, "Good afternoon, sir," crisp and genuine. There were no sneering jokes, no condescending remarks. They sat quietly, their conversations respectful. One young soldier, sitting near the front, leaned forward. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice earnest. "My instructor was telling us about the Shadow Panthers today. He said one of you lived in this city. Is that you?" Silas met the young man's eyes in the rearview mirror. He saw no arrogance, only a deep, sincere curiosity. A small smile touched Silas's lips. "I'm just a bus driver's son," he said, his standard deflective answer. But this time, the young soldier smiled back, a knowing, respectful smile. "Yes, sir. But my instructor, Lieutenant Deckard, told us that sometimes heroes drive buses." Silas felt a quiet warmth spread through his chest. He turned his attention back to the road, his heart filled with a sense of peace. He had not sought fame or recognition. His war was long over. But the knowledge that his story, and the stories of his forgotten comrades, were now being told, that their sacrifices were finally being used to teach the most important lessons of all: humility, respect, and honor, that was a victory more satisfying than any medal. He saw the world not through the eyes of a bitter or forgotten old soldier, but through the lens of a hopeful teacher. He saw the faces of the young soldiers in his mirror, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a profound and uplifting confidence in the future of the uniform he had once worn with such secret pride. The torch was being passed, and thanks to a painful but necessary lesson, it was now in better hands. The resolution was not a grand celebration, but a quiet, internal satisfaction, a hopeful glimpse of a better, more respectful world. What is a hero? Is it the person with the most medals pinned to their chest, or the one with the flashiest uniform? This story reminds us that true heroism, true worth, is not something that can be seen on the surface. It is a quiet, internal quality, forged in crucibles we may never know about. It resides in the hearts of those who have served and sacrificed without any expectation of fame or reward. The world is full of people like Silas Crane. They are the quiet janitors who were once brilliant scientists, the unassuming librarians who were once brave activists, the humble bus drivers who were once legendary soldiers. They walk among us, their incredible stories hidden behind a veneer of ordinary life. We pass them every day, and in our haste, in our superficial judgments, we fail to see the giants they truly are. We make the same mistake Lieutenant Deckard made, judging a book by its worn and faded cover. This tale is a powerful parable about the danger of arrogance and the profound importance of humility. It teaches us to look deeper, to listen more carefully, and to treat every single person we meet with the respect and dignity they deserve. You never know whose presence you are in. The person you dismiss today might just be the one who built the world you so comfortably inhabit. Their silence is not emptiness. It is a reservoir of experience that we can all learn from, if only we have the wisdom to be quiet and listen. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their appearance, only to find out they were someone truly extraordinary? We have all been on one side of that equation or the other. Share your experience in the comments below, because every story shared builds a stronger community of understanding and respect. The lesson from Silas and Lieutenant Deckard is a timeless one. True strength lies in humility, and true honor is found in how we treat others, especially those we believe have nothing to offer us. If this story of vindication and redemption resonated with you, if it made you think about the hidden heroes in your own life, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational short films and moral tales. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a story that might change your perspective. Remember, every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind, always. Because you never, ever know who is sitting right next to you, and the simple act of showing respect could be the most important decision you make all day. What will you do differently tomorrow after hearing this story? How will you look at the world and the people in it? The next chapter is yours to write. Make it one of kindness,